Hello and welcome to a special episode of Palace Confidential. I'm Richard Eden. Today I'm joined by Ken Wharfe, a man who for 16 years served as a police protection officer for the royal family. 6 of those were for the late Diana, Princess of Wales. He has written extensively on Diana's life and now, 25 years after her death, has written an authoritative account of her legacy alongside author and journalist Ros Coward, who was previously chosen by the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund to write Diana the Portrait. Thank you both for joining us today. Now, how did you go about reviewing your experiences of Diana and her legacy and combining them into one collaborative account for this book?
Well, I had the great good fortune to be commissioned to write the book Diana the Portrait, which allowed me to meet all her relatives, well, not all her relatives, but a good number of her relatives and friends, and several hundred people she worked with in different charities. So I didn't actually meet Princess Diana, but I did meet a lot of people who had a great deal of insight into her character. I did also meet Ken during those interviews, and I found his approach to understanding the life of Diana very, very sympathetic, and we've talked a lot since about Diana and her legacy, and this book came out of those conversations.
I remember meeting Ros a long time ago now when Diana the Portrait was published, which to this day always has been a reference book for me in all the things that I've read and said about Diana. But it was right, the timing was right that 25 years on, that I should think about writing something, the memory, the legacy of Diana. And I couldn't think of anyone better than Ros, who had become a good friend since those days way back almost 25 years ago. And so, together we put forward a proposal of what we thought we should say. I mean, Diana's life was so huge, so large, that to include everything in her life we'd have to think about an encyclopedia rather than a book. So, I mean, we sat together, we thought about a proposal, and the end result was, this book now. Some of it is a little bit edgy. We touch on things that perhaps, you wouldn't think about writing in a memoir commemorating someone 28 years. But it was quite important to Diana because it was a focal point of her life.
Ken, Earl Spencer has been very vocal recently about his belief that without official royal protection in the last years of her life, Diana was on a collision course that ultimately led to her death. What, in your view, was the driving force behind her decision to forego her royal security?
Well, I think it's quite important to say that I was pleased to hear Lord Spencer speak very openly about the question of the lack of protection, in his view, was ultimately the cause of her death, which he's right. I've always maintained that in many interviews that I've given since that dreadful day in 1997. From my point of view, the very fact that Diana singularly sort of abandoned the security in December 1993 was, in my view, the real cause of the problem, because what she'd lost was the experience and the expertise, certainly, of individuals that had protected her over nearly 13 years. And it was a discussion that I had with her at Kensington Palace when I decided to leave in '93. And interesting enough, she asked me a question, and that reunion, if you like, at Kensington Palace was like the old days when I first of all appeared as a new recruit at Sandringham House in Norfolk to become the protection officer to the young Princes William and Harry, who were then aged 5 and 3 respectively. So we reminisced about all the good times that we had. And then at the end of which, she said, look, if there's one question or piece of advice you'd give me, what would it be, Ken? And I said, look, whatever you do, I urge you not to give up your yard security. We've given you that protection. We've allowed you the freedom. And I can see where you're coming from, perhaps. It is an invasion of your privacy, but we kept you alive. And she said, yes, I understand that, but sadly didn't accept that. And I've always maintained that, and again, that had Her Majesty the Queen insisted that Diana retain her Scotland Yard security, Diana's belief and work ethos was always that loyalty to the monarch. Had the Queen said that, I have no doubt in my mind, that Diana would have accepted it. Had that been the case, of course, we wouldn't be sat here now.
And Ken, what's your opinion of Prince Harry's current battle to keep his Scotland Yard protection when he's in the UK?
Well, I can understand that, and a lot has been said, and a lot's been discussed both from his side and from a governmental side. And the very fact that he's chosen a new life in America is effectively no longer a working member of the British royal family. And I think that's where, the problem is. Initially, of course, he thought he could strike a deal with the Queen and do 6 months in America or 6 months somewhere in the world and 6 months back in a role as a prince of the realm, working with the British royal family. That hasn't happened. But I think what he feels is that, if he comes back to the United Kingdom with his wife and his children, then that deserves some sort of protection. I think where he's lost it is that no one's ever said that he wouldn't get protection. I don't think he would be given the full package that other working members of the royal family get, but the British government, together with the Commissioner of Police, would make sure that if such a journey was made with him and his wife and his children to London, of course a security would be given to him, but not perhaps in the format that he wished.
How have you seen the comparisons with how the royal family tried to welcome Meghan as an outsider into the fold, with how Diana was welcomed after her marriage to Prince Charles?
Well, Diana was certainly welcomed into the royal fold, the firm in the sense. But the comparisons that I see between Meghan and Diana is that they're incredibly popular. This popularity was Diana's main problem, not something that she concerned herself with. I mean, she couldn't help it. I mean, she was, a consummate performer on the stage in the same way that Meghan was, perhaps more so initially. Diana was very shy in the early 80s because this was a new venture for her, and she commandeered and garnered all the press publicity wherever she went for obvious reasons, in the same way that Meghan did. But Diana learned to live with it. I think Meghan found it rather difficult and perhaps wanted a different lifestyle, from the beginning. But, it's very difficult. I know Diana experienced it. The royal family, from the Queen downwards, even her own husband, found dealing with her popularity very, very difficult. And it's a shame, really, in the same way I think that happened with Meghan to a lesser extent, that had they sort of garnered and harnessed that popularity, it would have been better for all of them.
Yes, I very much agree with what you've said. And I think that there was a welcome to Meghan to begin with, and one can see that in the wedding that was kind of very much sort of embracing who Meghan was and where she'd come from. And but actually what's missing, and was to some extent missing with Diana, was that sort of ongoing support. I mean, Diana used to say that she'd had less sort of induction to her role than an average trainee at a supermarket, that she was never really given any kind of ongoing support, and particularly when she hit difficulties. And I think that's something that seems to be true of Meghan, that as her family relationships sort of became more and more problematic, not surprisingly really, because actually coming from that kind of background into the royal family must have created all sorts of fireworks. But where she could have been helped and supported is if someone from the palace had, perhaps tried to mediate and tried to kind of help when things became difficult. So I think there was a welcome, but, it seems the royal family is not very good at knowing what support would be, or understanding that people in that position suddenly, particularly women, suddenly subjected to that level of scrutiny and interest and attention, what kind of support and protection they might need.
Ken, have you seen a marked difference in the way that the institution of the monarchy responded to the controversies over the big television interviews? Martin Bashir with Princess Diana, and then Oprah Winfrey with Harry and Meghan.
Yeah, I think if we look at the Martin Bashir interview, I mean, it was sensational in the sense that, this had never happened before. A member of the British royal family, giving a sort of, tell-all interview to a journalist. Diana gave that interview because she felt, look, what else can I do? No one's prepared to listen to me. There was no mediation at all within the royal family before that. And so, she was left, in her opinion, with no option but to let everybody know what the real problem was. I've heard that perhaps Diana regretted it. I'm not totally convinced that she did regret it in the same way that she liaised with and dealt with telling her story with Morton some years previously. And the Oprah Winfrey program was almost a rerun of that, with Meghan actually sort of letting out what she felt about the royal family and her story, because I don't think she felt that she was being properly represented either by other sections of the media. So therefore, look, let me give it my way. I think a telling thing about that interview for me was that Harry made a rather late appearance in that program, and I think he found it difficult because this is something that he would have been unable to deliver, I think, in a way that he would want to. But he was there to represent and defend his wife. But Diana did it twice. Meghan has done it, and it was their way of actually letting their story out. Because up until that time, of course, Diana was being told repeatedly, well, you've got to speak to your husband about this. You can sort this out. But of course, that wasn't possible. It didn't happen, and people were being fed misinformation. And the Prince of Wales's court, if you like, his side was a much bigger operation than Diana's. So there was a lot of support coming down the line for him from people, and Diana didn't have that. So she had decided, well, look, I'm not getting that support. I want to tell you the truth. And that's what happened with Morton, and that's what happened with Bashir.
Ken, how do you think Diana would have dealt with the rift between Princess William and Harry?
Well, Diana was their mother, we know that, and a very good mother. I was very fortunate enough to witness close at hand at Kensington Palace and through many journeys on private holidays and at Highgrove, how she operated. And she was a very hands-on parent. William and Harry were naughty. Kids are, that's it. But, Diana didn't walk away from that. She dealt with it and tried to educate them in a way and bring them back into some normality of life, something that Diana was continually craving for. I want to be normal. What is normality? I mean, to be normal within a royal family is very difficult, because the royal family as such is, in essence, probably abnormal. But I think Diana made a lot of headway in being normal with her children, and as such had a very good relationship. I think she would have dealt with that rift. I think that she would have called a party to somewhere and say, look, what's happened? What we, we were good at one point. What is the problem? And I think she would have been a very good mediator, because Diana was very streetwise and would have seen the issues and the problems. And that seems to me to be lacking now. There is no parent that's prepared to referee, if you like, between the two of them and say, how can we put this right? But I do think Diana would have been incredibly influential in that sense, because she loved her children and they loved her.
There are many fascinating things in this book, and one of them I found was you say that Diana had a tendency to read everything that was written about her. Is that something that you think Harry and Meghan have adopted?
Well, Diana didn't miss a trick. I mean, every morning, at Kensington Palace, certainly, the chefs, would lay out on the chest freezer, the daily newspapers. And, Diana would go up to the kitchen, with a bowl of cereals and sit astride the chest freezer and read whatever the front headlines were. But of course, in the 80s and 90s, the inevitable punchlines were all about Diana, and 99% of them were very positive, headlines. Occasionally, there was a sort of, the dissenting one that of course they didn't like, and this is, where William got his idea that he didn't like photographers. He couldn't say photographers as a 5-year-old, but I remember in a journey with him on his first day at school, Diana said, look, when we get to the school, William, I want you to behave yourself. There can be lots of photographers. And he said, I don't like photographers, because he sort of hid under his peak of his cap. And I thought, well, how do you know? You've never met any. But of course, it suddenly dawned on me that he too would go to the kitchen with his mother, thin through the sort of daily newspapers, and then see a photograph of his mother he didn't like or read something, and that's why he didn't like photographers.
I think he still doesn't like
He
them,
probably
does he?
No, but I think he's found out from his own experiences now. But
and that might explain why his wife takes all the official photographs of their family.
Actually, not a bad move, as it so works out, because she's, quite a good photographer. But things have changed so much since those sort of halcyon days of the 80s and 90s of being within the royal family and working for the royal family. I mean, it's a different ball game now.
Ros, in the book you say that Diana's legacy is indisputably enduring, but is also contested. How do you think the way she is remembered 25 years on compares with in the immediate aftermath of her death?
I think in the immediate aftermath of her death, the public was so shocked and so distressed that she died in that particular way, and what then kind of emerged, not secrets necessarily, but a kind of interpretation that I guess Earl Spencer summed up in his speech, and in an understanding of what her life had been, what she tried to do, her enormous appeal. And I think people were, as we know from the vast outpouring of grief and the flowers that were laid outside Kensington Palace, people were united in thinking that they'd lost a very wonderful, special person, and perhaps we hadn't appreciated her enough or protected her enough, or let her sort of be chased to her death, apparently, through the tunnels of Paris. But so I think that was an initial moment. But since then, there have been, sort of attempts to kind of perhaps recast her. And indeed, I've noticed recently there's been quite a lot more talk about her being exceptionally paranoid. And even in her lifetime, there was sort of famous Nicholas Soames' comment that she was in the advanced stages of paranoia. And that kind of much more critical interpretation has come to the fore. And I think that there is more contestation over her legacy. I think our book is really very much sort of trying to recognise the charisma of the woman, the star quality she had, how she was a very powerful personality. I don't mean powerful in a manipulative way, but a powerful personality in the sense that she was a very attractive personality, she was a very easy personality, she was a very compassionate person. And I think sometimes it's quite difficult for society to kind of acknowledge that, particularly in a woman, that she had a sort of element of perhaps sort of, I hesitate to use the word greatness because it's perhaps not quite the right word, but there was a very special quality about her. And I think, it is difficult sometimes to recognise that in a woman, and perhaps that lies behind some of the the attempts we've seen in more recent years to kind of recast her as slightly deranged or paranoid or controlling, manipulative.
I think there's an interesting word there that I think is very relevant to Diana's legacy, and that is the word compassion. Because it's not easy on, let's say, a sort of typical walkabout in this country or abroad, to be compassionate. It's a job of work. You're stuck to strict timings. But Diana found a way of being compassionate with people she'd never met before, and that left such an impact. And this is part of the legacy. This is part of why she was so popular. In a royal walkabout, the royals are one side of the metal barriers, the public are the other. We don't know who they are. But suddenly, occasionally, someone will say something or shout something. Most royals, in my experience, will ignore it and move on to the next venue. But Diana had this ear for thinking, what's that? I remember once in Manchester, somebody saying, excuse me. And Diana said to the policeman, can you bring that old lady forward? And engage in a conversation. And all the lady wanted to say was, she'd been waiting for so long, I just wanted to say hello. And Diana held her hand. And it was this sort of compassion like that then was like a what would just ricochet through the community, and that's where her popularity just continued to rise, because she was a compassionate individual.
We all remember those photographs of Diana sitting on the bench in front of the Taj Mahal in India. They've sort of become iconic, you could say, over the years. What did Diana say on that day? I think there's something about that in your book.
Well, there is. Here was another classic case of, a joint tour in India with the Prince and Princess of Wales. And understandably, there was no way that the Prince was going to sit with his wife in front of the Temple of Love, given where their marriage stakes were. So the Prince had disappeared off somewhere else, and Diana was going to tour the Taj Mahal. But of course, the photo opportunity, the story, was always going to be with Diana. So the entire following press pack followed us to the Taj Mahal. And Diana was asked to sit on the bench. I think the bench that every VIP and every celebrity in the world sits on at some point when they visit the Taj Mahal. So Diana sat there very uncomfortably, and I was about 4 or 5 feet to her right-hand side. And it was Simon McCoy of Sky News shouted from the back of the Rat Pack, "What's it like, man? What does it feel like to be in this place?" And she turned to me, and through the corner of her mouth said, "What on earth do I say to that?" Well, I had no script. I wasn't the press officer. And I said, just say it's a healing experience. So, she sat down and said, "Oh, it's a very healing experience. It's a privilege to be here." And then some joker from the front of the pack said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And of course, now the conversation's getting hotter. I think she'd get up and move on. And she stood up with great confidence and looked at this photographer and said, "Well, work it out for yourself." and that was it. We stood off and went on the rest of the tour.
Classic Diana. Well, that's all we have time for this week. A reminder that Ken Wharfe and Ros Coward's fascinating new book is called Diana, Remembering the Princess, and it is out now. Joe Elvin will be back next Thursday with more on Palace Confidential. Goodbye.